Hi, and welcome to A Class of Their Own podcast, revealing the human stories behind their name. We will hear honest and intimate reflections from our guests who, despite their circumstances, shape a world that reflects their unique visions of success. Join me, Mira Magacha, to learn from these inspirational people and take the first step to make your own change. On today's episode, we're joined by Tayo Adesina. Hi Tayo, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. Lovely to meet you and see you.
You too? Tell me, who is Tayo?
Tayo is a young black Christian man from Southeast London. He loves his family, cherishes values, principles, morals, and ultimately is someone who's on a mission to change the world for the next generation of young people.
Change the world for the next generation of young people. Yes. What does that mean?
We have a saying in everything we do that ultimately every generation after you is the future. And if you're not investing in them, what value are you adding to mankind? And I think when we talk about sustainability, there are many forms and many aspects of sustainability. But for us, we focus on the minds of young people and giving them the opportunities they need. So in terms of changing the world, I'm a realist at the same time. I don't think what I'm doing is going to be changing policy tomorrow. But actually, I think it starts with the community that you're in. I think if you can shift the mindsets of those who are next coming up, who will be the next presidents, who will be the next future leaders, you have the ability to change the world. And that's ultimately what that means to me.
Okay. And so we talked about who Tayo was, and you said very quickly who you were. So tell me a bit about where you grew up and your childhood story that takes you to that mission.
Cool. I mean, born and raised to Nigerian parents. So they, first generation into the UK, they migrated over, had to take, a dip in what they knew in terms of education, in terms of the jobs they could do, because at the time, you're not going to come in as a lawyer. My dad was a lawyer by practice in Nigeria. Mum was a teacher. Both come here. My mum's had to be a cleaner for many years. My dad also had to be a chef, a taxi driver, many other jobs. Fortunately, he does now practice law. My mum also is a teacher and now retired. Yeah. But what that meant for me in my upbringing was I had parents who were very astutely aware that we need to work twice as hard as most of our peers. We need to make sure that we are educated. And the old adage, especially for those from diverse backgrounds, is if you're not going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer, what are you doing with your life, right?
Never heard that one before.
Never heard that before. And of course, I did none of those things, but I very much followed a traditional path based on the opportunities that my parents talked to me about. Very fortunate. I got 3 other siblings. I'm the youngest of 4, so I got to see them make some mistakes and make a lot of right choices. All of my siblings have been to university. All of them have got their degrees. My parents have also got their degrees. My mum's also got masters. So for me, I think my trajectory was quite fortunate in that even though I grew up in Southeast London, in an area that was predominantly racist at the time that I lived there, I was able to see there were other alternatives for my life. And ultimately what that meant is my upbringing meant I was focused to an extent. Definitely a troublemaker in school, definitely got myself in a lot of trouble. We can talk about that if you want to. But ultimately, I think my upbringing ultimately meant I had a drive and a desire that was within the educational system and beyond.
Okay, so you talk about growing up in a family unit that drove the behaviour of education's important. There's typical careers that you should be going down. And you also said that you didn't do that. So a mixture of a question, which is where did that influence of being a troublemaker come from? And maybe we'll start with that one and then I'll go into the next one.
Look, the reality is peer groups holds a lot of weight in a young person's life. And funny enough, even a book I'm reading at the moment called Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys, it really breaks down that there are multiple factors that change the trajectory for a young person's life. And a peer group weighting is high value. And if you look at the reality of how much time do I spend with my parents when they're at work versus how much time do I spend with friends at school and then even after school, the friendships you form and you make and you build your value system around has a massive weighting for what you choose to do with your free time. I think a lot of the trouble started when you start to entertain friendship groups that probably aren't the best influences. And I was fortunate. We left London when I was about 11, 12 years old, right at the time that I was starting to get mixed up into some of those crowds. And we moved to Kent. We moved about an hour away. And at that time, we were one of 10 black families in Kent, but it changed at least that London environment that I was in and gave me a new stomping ground to learn and find my way.
And was the move because, and without putting words into your mouth, was it because of the crowds that you or your sister's siblings were getting into, or was there a different reason to move out to Kent?
I think it might have been a factor, and it's probably a great question I should ask my parents someday. I think the main reason I always remembered was job related. Okay. I think my dad practicing law, it was a great move for him. I think he was going to a different law firm at the time. But yeah, that I think was one of the main factors. But I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't also around the time that my brother's also a teenager, could be getting in trouble, all sorts. So yeah, I suspect it was a factor.
Okay. And so what's been the biggest influence? Because we haven't talked about what it is that you do and why youth and young people is important to you. So talk to us about that journey.
The biggest, I guess, influence was one particular teacher. I remember her name to this day, Nicola Sandy. In fact, I don't think she even was a teacher. I think she was a part of the school staff. And she isolated me in the sense that she pulled me out and said, I believe in you. And she gave me encouragement, essentially, where other teachers would move me to the front of the classroom before they even met me. I remember that explicitly. I was in a German lesson. A German teacher was brand new. She'd never met me before, but because school teachers talk, and my mum told me she was a school teacher, they will mention your name if you are naughty. I got moved to the front without ever even being asked a question. But Nicola Sandy, as the teaching assistant who gave me support, love, affection, all of that good stuff, really helped me transition away from constantly trying to rebel, and ultimately gave me a pathway to say, look, you can focus, you can do great things, go and do them. And what I see there consistently, and especially for a lot of young people, is the intervention that comes from someone who's older than you, who's a role model, who is alike to you, can really help change your trajectory.
I love that story of a teacher without even knowing you, haven't spoken to you, just pulls you up.
Very real.
Very real. And what about your childhood shows up in who you are today?
It's a deep question. I think family values. I think, growing up at a time before the internet and social media and all of that good stuff, I had a dial-up at some point in my life, right? I think family values and community played a massive role. I think church life also played a massive role in me having a community and a place to belong, not just on a Sunday, but we also had Saturday school. So you're constantly building relationships with people. And I think that's really shown up in my life in a way that I like to communicate, in a way I like to bond. And I don't necessarily think that's an extrovert versus introvert thing or an ambivert thing. I think it's part of my core values is about being there for the people who are close to me, and actually building bridges with those who I don't know at all. And I think that's one of the core tenets that's really shown up in my life today.
Building bridges with people you don't know. How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, I am the kind of person that if I'm in a bad mood, don't talk to me, leave me alone. But on a normal day-to-day, when I'm not in a bad mood, I'm happy to converse, chat with anybody, find a mutual connection with anybody. And I think, fortunately, working in a professional career at some point in my life has really highlighted that you can be very different from people, but still find something in common. And I think that's a beautiful thing about the reality of life, that you can have multiple walks of life, but actually you will find common ground if you search for it. And I love exploring that. I love finding that when I meet new people. That's just the norm.
And where does that come from? Where does that desire to connect come from?
For me personally, I think that is based on my faith system. I think that is, as a Christian, my desire to love on other people, to show them the kind of Christ-like love that I've experienced in my life. I think that innately drives me to just want to be loving and show care to others. Don't get me wrong, I'm not perfect. Definitely going to make mistakes, definitely going to do dumb things I shouldn't. But naturally, my inclination is to build bridges with those who I don't know.
And so what was the last thing you Googled?
I was actually Googling the last stabbing in my area in Bermondsey. A young girl lost her life on Christmas Eve. And this is the block that I grew up in, literally around the corner. That was the last thing I Googled.
And why are you Googling that? What triggered that Google search?
Yeah, I think proximity, right? I'm walking past where all the balloons are laid out for this young girl daily as I'm going to the station, as I'm making my way here. I think that's one aspect, and that's the reality for a lot of the young people that I work with and engage with. Proximity, you see these things, you're exposed to these things, and unfortunately, I was actually walking past on that day, and I saw all the police, and obviously I didn't know what was happening at the time. I'm minding my business, and I went about, but I was visibly seeing the impact of that stabbing. And I think again, seeing the kind of mural, the balloons today reminded me that I wanted to understand. I wanted to understand what goes through a 16-year-old's mind that they can take somebody else's life. I wanted to know what was the cause of death. I wanted to know ultimately the kind of situation that a lot of Londoners are finding themselves in at such a young age. And that's what got me Googling.
And how does it link to the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, so ultimately I'm here to advocate for young people. I specifically focus on breaking social isolation barriers for young people. And in terms of the work that we do, I run a social mobility organisation called Trash Gang. Our whole role is to break social isolation for young people. What that looks like for us is giving them hope, opportunities, and we do that through a creative outlet. We get them co-creating and designing streetwear clothing that tells their story. So the first co-created design we ever did was a young 19-year-old talking about the impacts of knife crime. And she drew a bunch of skulls. As morbid as that sounds, she was actually reflecting upon the fact that it's not just the young person whose life that's lost, it's all the family members and all of the community that's also impacted. And we helped articulate that, take her voice and turn it into a streetwear design. And we gave her that design. She takes it home. And we as a business now have made that our full thing. We run a 6-week dedicated program for young people to articulate their voice, what they're going through, and equip them with the skills that they can go on and find meaningful work. It's all about them at the end of the day for us. And
so where and why did that come about?
I mean, I think realistically, it was what I call the itch. So I was working as a management consultant for 4 or 5 years, enjoyed my career. It was a great career, loved the firm that I was at. But I got the itch in about year 2, and I call the itch this feeling that you're not quite living the life that you're supposed to be living. You're not quite doing everything you can be to be at your very best. And I've always said for years, before I even had this idea of this organisation, I've always said for years, if I could do anything, I probably would be a teacher. But in all honesty, I also said they're not valued enough. They're not paid enough. They're not appreciated enough. And that's not something I'm willing to do. So the basis was I knew I wanted to teach. I knew I had this heart and desire to impact and drive for young people. I've just organically somehow found this way to create an entire organisation to uplift and educate young people. Very naturally, to be perfectly honest with you, it doesn't feel planned. It is what it is. And
so when you were growing up, what was success for you?
I think as a young person, success is an amalgamation of your closest values in terms of your peer system, your family network, your closest friends. I think success ultimately was kind of what was distilled down to me. And then you have to go through a process as you grow older to unpack that's really your desire of success, and then recreate your own version of success. So as a young person, I think success was having enough money to be able to do the basic things, right? Yeah. My dad might have been a lawyer, but we definitely weren't making money like that. And so for me, success was for me as a young person to say I can get the best grades I possibly can, do as good as I can as possibly in school so that I can go and get a great job. And that was very much the kind of distilled knowledge that was passed down to me. And then adulthood has slowly had me re-questioning, reaffirming, re-understanding, is that what I call success? And I think it's clearly not quite the fit for me.
Where are you on that journey of what is success in the adult world today?
Impact. I say this as someone who's still not making loads of money, but ultimately it's about impact for me. And that's not legacy. That's not me leaving my name on a door and someone patting me on the back to say, great job. It's those small messages when a young person says, thank you so much for the opportunity. Because I know how much it means to have one person intervene at a pivotal point in your life and how that can completely shift your trajectory. For me, that word ultimately is impact.
What was that pivotal moment for you in your life?
Nicola Sandy. I think, in school, I was always that kid at parents' evening that, he'd do great if he just focused and applied himself. He'd be fantastic, but he's so destructive in class. That was the normal year by year kind of message. At one point I was on what we called it's not a PIP, but like a performance improvement plan. So I was at school. I don't think they called it a PIP, but it was a red book, a yellow book, and a green book. Okay. And I was on a yellow book. Then at one point I was on a red book. At one point I was even suspended over the dumbest thing, but I was suspended at one point in my life. So I look at, again, the trajectory I was on based on just how I chose to behave, though I had all of these opportunities. I went to a grammar school. I had all of the opportunities. I passed my 11 pass, but I was scraping the barrel of the teeth, I just got in. But I had all these opportunities, but I was willing to squander them until I met somebody like Nicola Sandy who intervened. And And I do say, you know, she had a massive impact, and obviously have to give massive thanks to my parents and the work they did, and my siblings. They obviously paved that way. But ultimately, that external influence is so powerful, and that's what I see, and that's why we as an external influence as an organisation realise that what we say to young people has such a large impact in changing their trajectory.
When we spoke prior to coming onto the podcast, there was something that happened to one of your best friends.
Yes, my best friend David. And that was during my secondary school. So my best friend Dave, as we hashtagged it back then, took his own life. He committed suicide. He would have been around 21. And it was, one of the most defining moments, obviously, in my life that changed my trajectory too. And that's where I guess this drive for breaking social isolation barriers is so pertinent and so important to me. Dave was probably one of the only of our close group of friends who didn't go to university. Not that university meant that it was the right place to be, but ultimately it just meant distance-wise. He was no longer close to us. We all scattered across the UK. He was the only one that was left in Kent, which meant he was fighting his own battles, and none of us really and truly had the time because we're not there. You know, we grew up in a time you just pull up to your best friend's house, knock on the door and hope he's there. Yeah. And unfortunately, in that period, I remember vividly being in the library and my mum called me. She said, "Oh, have you heard about David?" I was like, "No, what's going on?" She's like, "Oh, he's in hospital." I was like, "What? He's in hospital?" And obviously I rushed. I left the library. I went all the way back to Kent from London. I was studying at UCL. I went to Kent to go and see him. And yeah, he didn't make it. He didn't make it. And to lose, you know, your best friend, and when I say best friend, I mean, we did everything together. I mean, he taught me how to ride my first motorbike at 15. Don't tell the police. He taught me how to play the drums. He taught me how to ski. You know, he really was the guy that I did everything with. He was family. He was family to me. But yeah, for him to take his own life, for him to be in that place of darkness, to be in that place where he didn't feel like he could share everything with me, it very much highlighted the reality for a lot of our young people. They need more outlets. They need more safe spaces. They need the ability to articulate what they're going through. And part of that is actually building their resilience to communicate what they're going through. And that's why I'm focusing on creating programs that give them that confidence to do that. Sometimes you can have your best friends in the room with you every single day. It doesn't mean you're talking about what you actually want to talk about. And that's why I feel there is a need to find a balance between the power of a peer group versus the external influences that are positive and mentors and all of the good stuff that genuinely helps young people.
This episode is brought to you by Play for Change. Play for Change brings together leadership coaching, expert facilitation, and builds communities. They help craft real connections, spark learning, and turn play into powerful experiments to enable better relationships with yourself and others around you. Let's redefine how we connect and learn through play. To find out more, go to playforchange.co.uk, links in the show notes below. And so growing up as a black child in Kent, which is not, well, back then I'm assuming, wasn't very diverse, wasn't very multicultural. You probably didn't see many people that looked similar to you and your family. And then having that influence at the age of 21 of someone very close to you dying from suicide, how has that changed your trajectory in terms of how you live your life and your friends around you?
I mean, yeah, reflecting on Kent, you deal with over in-your-face racism. It happened. I got in fights in school over it. I was called a Mars bar once. Stupid comment, but it triggered me anyway. I know, it made no sense. Mars bars are black. I mean, brown. Okay. So I think that for me, I had to learn quite quickly that you can't fight your way out of everything. Because one, you're heavily outnumbered, so there's only so much fighting you can do. Two, it meant I had to learn how to use my mouth and articulate and rebuttal and all that kind of good stuff. And Americans call it the dozens, where you can cuss somebody out. Very much that kind of concept that I had to learn how to articulate myself well enough in different crowds and different environments. And I think transitioning also to losing my best friend, I think he was white. I mean, there wasn't that many black people in Kent at the time as I was growing up. My best friend was white, and I think what that also showed me, especially when we'd spend time with like his grandparents who were wealthy, and again, the way they spoke was very different to what I knew. It showed me again that I had to be able to articulate myself in multiple rooms. And it actually meant that at times I will be judged before I've even spoken. And I've always felt like it's not my burden to convince you I'm a great person. It's not my burden to convince you that I know what I'm talking about. However, I will always represent myself in the best way I possibly can in every room that I'm in. And that's ultimately what I'm teaching young people as well. It's not your burden to convince someone who's ignorant, who's a bigot, but it is your responsibility for yourself to be your best version wherever you are.
You grew up in the southeast of London as a black family, and then you moved to Kent. Was there anything around accents at that point versus what the accent is now?
Yes.
And does that come across in any of the conversations that you have in today's world when maybe you're on a virtual call but you haven't got the camera on?
Yes, great question. I think the first place that was even evident around accents is in my home. So my siblings, being older than me, grew up in London a lot longer than me. So their London accent was London and it was strong. And then for me, I obviously started to adopt this bit of Kent twang, this kind of Medway language. So actually in my household, I would be noticed as a little bit different because of the way that I spoke compared to my siblings. Not in a bad way, but it's something that we'd laugh at and joke about. And then as I progressed through this kind of school system, as I got kind of older and I got to university, so like you're laughing about that one really. You know that feeling? And then obviously, as you get to university, I chose to go to UCL, so I was back in London again. And again, compared to my London black peers who've grown up in London, even my white peers who grew up in London longer than I had, where I had that gap in Kent, my accent wasn't quite as London as theirs was. But fortunately, in some ways, you could say, in Kent, whilst I was living there, it was cool to have a London accent. Everyone wanted to pretend like they were from London. So if you said you lived in Kent, you'd claim you're from London. It was kind of the thing to do. But actually what I realised is ultimately I was able to articulate myself a lot faster than some of my peers. I was able to have conversations with senior white males, white females in offices that otherwise I probably would have struggled a little bit more. And to your point about, if I'm video conferencing and my camera's not on, I mean, look, my name gives it away every single time. So yeah, I don't get that pass, I don't get that pass. But ultimately, yeah, I think there have definitely been times where people are a little bit taken aback at the fact that I'm able to articulate myself. And that's not to say that I'm an expert in articulating myself, but ultimately there is a difference in the way that I would carry myself when I'm in certain rooms. And when I'm with my boys, my language will obviously change. And we call it code switching, we call it whatever you want, right? But the reality is, yeah, there is a part of me that sees it as a form of survival. When I'm in a corporate space, I don't get to sound even like this. I won't even sound like this. There is a slight difference in the way that I would speak. When I'm with my boys, my voice changes again. When I'm with my young people, it's more like when I'm with my boys, because I want them to see that being their true, authentic self, which a lot of corporates will advise and encourage within a limited margin, of course, because you can't really be authentic self, especially when you are a minority in the workplace. But yeah, for me, I think I've been fortunate enough to be able to balance multiple avenues and walks of life just through the power of my voice.
So give us a little example of what you speak like when you're with the boys or the young people, your authentic self. Which one is the authentic Teo?
I mean, look, this is it. This is as close as it will get. This is as close as it will get. I mean, the reality is, I'll give you the work version in a second. I think the reality is, you're mixing slang, you're mixing the everyday conversation. And obviously, especially growing up in London as a black young male, I've got Jamaican friends, I've got Nigerian friends, I've got Caribbean friends. I'm throwing in languages, I'm throwing in patois, I'm throwing in things that I have no business speaking patois, but you throw it in as everyday language, right? Whereas my work voice is probably more like this. It's a little bit more polite, it's a little bit more softer. I probably, use softer language and lower my tone a little bit. But that's not me. That's not how I like to talk. That's not who I am. And it made it that little bit easier to move away from the corporate space, because it's very hard to balance not being your true self every single day for years at a time. And that's not a blaming of a particular firm or corporates as a whole, but that is the culture that we live in. We've determined what professionalism is. And often for me as a black person, I have to tailor what professionalism actually is when I enter into work.
Who's defined what professionalism is?
HR. It's the culture. No, I won't blame HR. It's the culture of working environments that are ran by senior white executive leaders who, and I've always had this challenge, if you were to ask them how many of your own private personal friendships you have that have any form of diversity in them, the honest answer is probably none or very few. And that's not to say you have to now go out and get yourself a token black friend or an Asian friend to counteract it. What I'm saying is your everyday life, the life that you actually live, is quite distanced and far removed from those of culture. So when you now bring them into your working environment, that working environment was set up for you to succeed as a white counterpart. And I always give this example because this is a real example that did happen to me while I was at work, to express this. COVID 2020, I believe it was HR. It was someone corporately within the organization, and it was a chain-wide message to everybody in the office. They were trying to give tips basically on how to present yourself on camera because everyone's having to work remotely. One of the first tips was don't wear a white shirt because it will wash out your face. I'm a black man. If I wear a white shirt, it's going to help my face to be highlighted. What that emphasized is when we think about communications and the culture and the organization that we work for, it is thought about first from the lens of the white counterparts before it is everybody else within that diversity spectrum. And that for me is just a constant reminder, even at work, that I don't fit in. And it might sound small, it might even sound innocent, but the reality is it's not. It's something that is an afterthought when it comes to looking after those of diverse backgrounds. And when you have a culture that starts with the white counterparts being the culture, you're trying to shoehorn and fit diverse into a white organization. And that's why there's a challenge. And that's why you need more senior leaders who come from more diverse backgrounds, etc., that can help change the kind of culture from the ground up.
You mentioned that you were in management consulting. So presumably you also went out to work with clients rather than you were an internal person. Primarily, who were your clients? Public
sector, private sector. Unsurprisingly, the public sector, very similar culturally. I've been fortunate to work across multiple organizations, seen multiple different types of businesses and business models, but very rarely would you see a culture change in any of them. You'd see active steps, which I always have to commend. You do have organizations who are trying to pave the way and to bring some realization to the fact that their organizations aren't as diverse as they ought to be. But the reality is, there was very few and far differences between any of them.
Okay. In terms of failure, there could be a view that you went into consulting and you failed and you left.
Okay.
I don't know.
I hear it. I think, again, it depends on what you call success. I think in the corporate space, success is laid out as promotions to the top. Again, as far and as senior as you can. The reality was I saw what happened to the few most senior black people in the organization at the time I was there. They'd get to their level just below partner and they wouldn't make partner and they would leave. And I saw that happen 2 to 3 times. So for me, that quite quickly showed me that's probably not the pathway for me. But, to be honest, I go back to the itch. I think that for me was the real driving force. For me, it wasn't about staying in consulting forever. I loved consulting whilst I was in it. It was definitely enjoyable. I learned so much and I was stretched like crazy. And you really realize what you're capable of doing as a human in consulting, right? You're working for multiple clients sometimes at a time. But the itch, that feeling that I wanted to do something, I needed to do something in the youth space was such a driving force that even if I was on track towards being a partner, which I definitely wasn't, probably wouldn't have been the thing that would have kept me. And I accept my limitations. I think the reality is for most people, and very much in line with Simon Sinek's, you start with your why, there was only so much motivation I could draw. And actually the desires to go beyond the consultant rank that I'd got to, it just wasn't there. And outside of trying to chase a paycheck, there was no other kind of motivation. Right. But one of the things I was most proud of, and that's why for me it could never have been a failure being there and it was always success, is I spent a lot of my time in the D&I space within the BAME network as working within the Affinity Group. And one of the last things I did before I left the organization is I interviewed 4 or 5 partners and I got them to do like a mini podcast and record it and talk about diversity within the organization. I got them to be honest and I got them to open up about their own friendship circles and what that looked like. Being able to get partners to be willing to be challenged like that publicly, at least internally on the intranet of the organization, was a big deal for me. It was a big shift in the right direction culturally. I think that I could challenge politely, respectfully, partners to reconsider what we call diversity in the organization. So actually, naturally, what I found was my real passion, my real energy was going towards this D&I space, was going towards making a difference for people who were like me in any way, shape or form. The itch just made it really clear it was for the young people that I wanted to put all of that energy into.
You had this desire to work with young people. I suppose, was that influenced by your experience growing up and that teaching assistant? Or was there something else that influenced I want to impact the youth of today?
Great question. 100% the loss of my best friend. That single-handedly, and I didn't know at the time because I was trying to process obviously all the emotions and what you're going through with loss, and it took and takes years to really kind of comprehend what you're going through with that kind of pain. But single-handedly losing Dave for me was the catalyst for me to say, and I want to make a difference for young people. I want to give them the opportunities where they have their voice, where they can be real about what they're going through, where they are able to articulate themselves, so that they don't have to be like Dave. They don't have to go through that. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure Dave had many other things going on in his life, but one of the key things that I could pull out was that social isolation. It was that inability to talk about what you were really going through, and for someone to be your best friend that you share everything with, everything, for them to get to a place where they're willing to take their own life and they don't share that, shows me there's still a part of themselves they weren't able to share.
And so did that become the movement to set up Trash Gang?
Yes, yes and no. I think I was backwardsly kind of inspired to run a business because I knew that I couldn't quite do the working for somebody else forever. I think there was definitely this selfish ambition that I wanted to run my own organization. I didn't know what that was going to be at the time. But there was a desire for that in itself. And then I was actually fortunate enough to have partnered with a charity called Circle Collective. And I said, hey, I want to run a pop-up store. I want to design some clothing. I want to run a pop-up store in your shop. And they said, yeah, great. We support independent brands. Let's do that. And from that, on the first day of that pop-up store, I don't know why or how the idea came to me, but I said, I want to invite young people in the back to run a little workshop with them. We had like 10, 13 young people over like 2-3 little groups come in, and they were talking about the impacts of what they see in their day-to-day life. And that literally drove the entire idea of what this organization now is. And again, it felt very organic. And at the time, I couldn't process why I wanted to do this. But you look back in hindsight now, and it's very clear to see that I have a burning desire to get young people equipped, uplifted, and with the ability to articulate themselves.
And who are the young people that you work with? Yeah,
so predominantly it's underrepresented young people. By underrepresented, that comes in many forms and shapes. We use what we call the IMD scale, indices of multiple deprivation. So without the UK, we have a measure of deprivation ultimately. Underrepresented young people for me are Black, Asian, ethnic minorities, and those who have come from any form of deprivation. So that could be a low-income household, that could be parents who haven't gone to university or higher education of some sort, multiple factors on that scale. 16 to 25-year-olds is ultimately who we're trying to support here. I think 16 is a key moment as well, as you start to transition out of the formal education. You now have this freedom and this open world to go on to further education if you want, or completely scrap it and go to work. I think that's a really pivotal point to speak and get through to young people, and basically just show them they've got so many opportunities if they're willing to learn and grow.
So what's been the biggest challenge in setting this up?
Having no idea what you're doing every single day. I mean, that's the case for every business owner, said ever. I think a part of this is the fact that I'm having to relearn an entirely new skill set I've not had to use before. Being in this social mobility space means I'm closer to a charity. I'm not a charity, I'm a CIC, I'm a community interest company. But it means a lot of the work I do is talking to charities. It is trying to understand the third sector. It is trying to understand how that works. And I think part of that challenge is I need to learn how to articulate the work that we do in such a way that you instantly get it, you instantly understand the impact we're having. And a part of me that I guess hasn't sat so well previously, but I understand the value of it, is being able to have your kind of case studies, your success stories of all the young people. I never want it to feel like I'm a parade in a young person's misery to showcase how great we are as an organization. Yeah. But it is important to show that they've made a real transition from where they were, point A to point B. And that as a learning curve for me has been important to pick up. That for me has been an important piece to say it is important to track data. It is important to understand what impact are you actually having. You need to measure these things. If you're not measuring it, you're taking everything anecdotally, and that's not good enough. So yeah, it's been a real growth. It's been a real growth setting up an organization. But I think the one thing that's stayed true and has been the biggest blessing is that young people gravitate to the work that we're doing. And that's in the capacity of wanting to work with us or work for us to wanting to be on our programs. They gravitate to it. And for me, that is the biggest pat on the back to say, okay, you're doing something in the right direction. When young people are like, I love what you're doing, I want to be a part of it, it shows me that I am speaking to the audience I need to speak to. Got a long way to go, of course. But it feels like we're on the right trajectory.
When you chose to leave consulting and do something, scratch this itch,
Yes.
what was the reaction you got from society?
In fairness, I think most people were quite supportive. Family definitely were. I think being the last sibling of 4 means you get a free pass to do whatever you want. My siblings had all the hard stuff. I get it nice and easy. My parents getting older, they ain't got the energy they used to. So parents super supportive, family super supportive. I even wrote a business plan to convince my parents this is what I wanted to do. That's how serious I was about this. And I think from my closest friends, again, I feel fortunate that I've invested in friendships that are encouraging as opposed from detracting. And they were all supportive. They were like, cool, let me know when you start this thing. I'm happy to support you. If you want me to talk to some young people, I'll do that. And that's been the continued voice I've had in my ear, which has always been encouragement. And I have to give massive shout outs to my wife as well. She's been the biggest encourager. We got married in 2020, and that was the year I decided to leave consultant. So I decided to quit my job, ultimately, make no money and start my married life. And she's been supporting me ever since. So massive shout out to her for that. But I think I've been, again, fortunate to have the support system around me.
Again, we've talked a little bit about personal friendship groups. What does your personal friendship group look like?
In all honesty, highly educated, highly successful bunch of guys and girls. I think naturally going to university changed the people that I'd met in terms of walk of life. I've got friends who are also consultants, who are bankers, who are doctors. They've all done their own respective journey and success, quote unquote, based on whatever they might define it to be. But yeah, my closest friends are doing amazing things that I'm proud of to see every day. We are the ones who are trying to encourage each other to do better every single day. And it just goes to show how powerful your peer network actually is. And again, I re-emphasize for a 16-year-old, that peer network is so powerful. And we need to be encouraging, especially as someone who's hopefully one day going to be a future parent, we need to be encouraging to know who your children's friends are. Know how they engage, know how they speak, know how they interact. And I'm not here to give anyone parental advice, but I think that's something that I've seen in my own life, right? Is the power of your peer network. And I'm fortunate to have great friends.
Could life have turned out very differently for you?
Yes, very much, yes. I think even anecdotally, just at the time we moved to Kent, I think we were living in Kent less than 3 or 6 months. There was a large story about Damilola Taylor, who obviously lost his life in South London, right around the corner from our church. The police actually came to our house and questioned me, and I was probably like 12 or 13 at the time. But for me, looking back, obviously I had no involvement whatsoever, but just by the proximity of the fact that I was so close to where that had happened, where Damilola Taylor lost his life, I was looked at in a way that I needed to be questioned. And I think that spoke volumes to what my life could have been like if, one, I didn't move out at the time I did. And that's not to say living in London was the worst thing in the world, but at that time for me, it clearly was a great and a successful move. But yeah, I think there's been multiple times in my life where I can look back and say that, yeah, I've been very fortunate that I haven't ended up going in one direction or the other. And I have to give thanks to my parents for being the strict, loving parents that they were, and my siblings who were, again, wise counsel. I don't take for granted that I've got siblings who love me and I love them. I don't think every family has that, where their siblings all get along. Love my family. I love my siblings. I think that is such a blessing to have that, and I don't take that for granted.
What is success moving forward?
I think I'd define it ultimately in that same word of impact. I think if I was to break what impact is down, I think for me success will then be how many young people I've given great opportunities to that have come around and turned back and said, hey, I've either got a job because of your impact, I've figured out a clearer vision for my life because of your impact, I've improved my friendship circle because of your impact as an organisation. So the more young people I can impact, that you can turn around and say their trajectory has changed, that is success. And that's all I'm really driving for right now.
And that's potentially a very business outward focused level of success. Is there a difference of what personal success is for you?
Yeah, 100%. And it's an easy answer. It's creating systems and a lifestyle that I want to live by forever. And I, again, feel pretty great that I've already kind of lined it up. And what I mean by that is, I think one of the greatest joys is waking up and feeling like you're living the life you want to live every day. And that's not because of the money in your account. That's not because you live in a sunny country. It's because intrinsically I feel like I love the fact that I wake up early every morning. I love the fact that I can do 2 hours of work before I do anything else. I love the fact that I can spend time and take my dog for a walk. I love the fact that I can focus on my marriage and my wife and all that other great stuff that comes with. And I very much feel like I'm living the life I'd like to live forever. I'd like to be in a bigger house or a bigger place in a bigger space, but ultimately knowing that I've lived each and every day in a way that I desire to live, I don't think there's any greater success than that.
Awesome. So final question. We started off the conversation with who is Tayo. So can we loop back round and go, is there anything that you would add to that?
I think it would stay the same. I am a Christian black man who's passionate about changing the world for young people.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed that conversation, then please share A Class of Their Own podcast with your friends and family and keep spreading the word to those that haven't discovered us yet. It makes a huge impact on our ability to have the people you want. Keep being you through connection, learning and play. You are a class of your own.